model it, figure out how to build applications around it so that, that data could get populated and moved and transformed in the ways that it needed to so that people could use it effectively. That's really been, a theme. And that's kind of the motivation between starting a company built around data engineering.
Cool, thank you very much. I guess we'll go down in the order that we're in right now. So Jeremy, then followed by Irina, then Peter.
Hey everybody, I'm Jeremy Woodworth, currently a solution architect with Elastic. If anybody doesn't know Elastic, the company, we're the ones who make Elasticsearch. I'm sure everybody has used Elasticsearch on this call. How I got here is by being a pretty distracted person. So I started my professional life in the Air Force, did government contracting for a number of years, and basically along the way found myself looking at, thinking of, and addressing data problems. That involved data engineering. It involved dabbling in some machine learning and fields that are more closely associated with data science. And eventually that took me into designing entire systems because things just weren't meeting my needs. So here I am as now a solutions architect, helping other people design systems. And I'm happy to talk with everybody and meet all the fellow panelists today.
All right, so I guess I'll go next. My name is Irina. I am a senior data engineer at Capital One. I think pretty much everyone knows that Capital One does. I work in commercial tech, so I'm on the side that deals with commercial customers. And the way I got into data engineering is actually by wanting to be a better data analyst. So my previous 5 years or 4 or 5 years were, being as a DA for various smaller and larger companies. Originally started as a business analyst at ICF, a local consulting firm, and just I had a lot of free time on my hands as a business analyst and ended up learning SQL and VBA, and they were kind of like my gateway drug into programming. And afterwards, I worked for a smaller, electrical forecasting company, and it was a very nice place to grow. But unfortunately, it only had one data engineer at a time, and that just meant if you wanted to get your job done, if you wanted to get your forecasts to your clients, you had to figure out all of your data engineering problems by yourself. So because of the turnaround time could be a little long. So things like, oh, where's my data for the model? Oh, why is my data so messed up? So when I kind of got fed up of dealing with that, I said, you know what, why don't I try, the data engineering path to kind of help me when I transition back to being a data analyst, and that I haven't transitioned back ever since. So I keep thinking about, I'm going to go back into data science and be a data scientist because that's what my master's about. But I still find things to learn in data engineering. So we'll see at what point I'm going to say enough is enough. Let me go back to more DA type stuff. So.
It's interesting to talk about the difference between architects and engineers. I'm fairly old, and also apologize to you guys so you can't see my face, but I live in Montpelier where I'm on the other end of a DSL connection. So those of you that don't understand what DSL is, look it up. It's one step above dial-up. I got into this field, interestingly enough. I was a freshman at VCU in 1977. And one of the things that they had, well, actually, they only had one computer at VCU in 1977, just to be perfectly clear. So anybody that wanted any help in the computer area had to come to the computer center, which was where the computer was. It was the 4th floor of what is now Harris Hall, for those of you that are locals on this. And about once a month, somebody would run into the consulting area, the people that had problems with computers, and they'd say something like, I'm a professor and I'm going to get fired at the end of the month because I haven't finished my dissertation and my data is here. Can you help me? And when they said here, they meant part of their data was on punch cards, part of their data was on rolled up tapes, part of their data was on magnetic tapes, part of their data was written down. And of course, as our colleagues will get into this evening, that's some of the hardest stuff in data to actually solve those problems. So I didn't determine at that point in time I was going to be a data engineer, but I did go on and get a terminal degree in that area, and went to work at the Pentagon working for something called the Defense Information Systems Agency. And interestingly enough, the very first task they wanted me on at the Defense Information Systems Agency was the problem that they had 37 systems that paid people in the Defense Department. I'm pretty sure anybody in this call can come up with the right number. That would be 1 would be a good number to have, and all of that. And the question was not so much about, how do we actually merge those systems, but who was going to win? What was the dominant system going to be? Because whatever one was picked, there would be 36 or 37 other losers in that equation. It was a very interesting exercise. I can tell you about it when we can get back and start doing beer drinking and things like that instead of having to drink our wine at social distance things. Anyway, thank you for inviting me tonight. I'm really looking forward to the rest of the program here.
Well, this is great. Yeah, like I said, you guys all come from really cool backgrounds and you guys have a ton of experience, which is great. I was going to ask about your jobs and sort of differentiating data engineers from other roles, but you guys did a really good job of that already. So I think that that's going to set the stage for, just some general questions about data engineering, getting into that area. So, I kind of wanted to put like a sort of COVID twist on the questions, and, we're dealing with areas in getting jobs that we haven't dealt with before. And since most of our job can be outsourced to be remote, I'm in my bedroom, as you can see, and I've been here all day working, so basically with our field transitioning to remote work, how should those just beginning their data engineering careers sort of change their approach to entering this field? And I guess we can start off with the data engineer, the only one on the panel, technically, Irina.
That's a tough one because the job, when I got my job, this was way before the pandemic. This was a year ago in July. So, well, I think the good news is that a lot more companies I think they're opening up to the idea of hiring remote. I think a year ago, one of my family members got a remote job, and we were shocked by the fact that she's not going to be going to the office. But I think at this point, companies are fairly open-minded, getting more open-minded about it. So I think that opens more doors to those of us who are already in the field. Let's say, previously, if you wanted to work for maybe Microsoft or GitHub, you'd have to probably move, and now you probably don't. But for somebody breaking into the field, I am not quite sure what to advise them. I think maybe I know that some services such as LinkedIn Learning and Udacity, I know some of the classes, I know some people have taken advantage of the fact that they offer maybe discounted classes. So maybe, bringing your skills up to snuff for some of the positions you're interested in, would be a good way to make use of that quote unquote extra time we have now that we don't have to commute. But I don't know if that's necessarily a perfect, advice on how do we break into data engineering during COVID? Because the answer is it's probably going to be a little tougher than during normal times.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. If anyone else wants to hop in, by the way, I want to try to facilitate a discussion between the four of us. So I think that's great. I'm trying to take a back seat. I would love to answer all the questions I came up with. Jeremy, what about you? You have any thoughts?
Yeah. So Elastic is a distributed company by intention originally. So most of the companies actually worked remotely even before COVID. And we always considered it sort of a competitive advantage. So maybe we've lost that. But the idea was that we can hire the best person for the job no matter where they live. They don't have to be within commuting range. They could be a specialist who really wants to live in some off-grid village in Utah or wherever, we don't care. Now everybody's open to that. So there's a little more competition for people in these less accessible locations. But as a job seeker, I think it's interesting to have that perspective in mind, because companies are really, truly looking for the best fit for every job. So being active, if the company does open source, be active on their GitHub, watch what issues they're working on. If you have something to contribute there, then it could be that you are perfect for something that's important to that company. And in that case, I personally, I'm, I guess maybe a little audacious, but I would just reach out to people on LinkedIn or forego the jobs website and say, hey, you're working on this weird protocol and making parsers for whatever. I can help with that. And I've seen lots of people end up with remote jobs that way. just by really doing their sleuthing on what companies need?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I think that a lot of LinkedIn is recruiting to begin with, believe it or not. So, you know, recruiters are hunting all day. They'll always accept your connections, believe it or not.
Yeah, actually, I mean, just trying to hire data engineers during this period, it's gotten, I would say, perhaps slightly easier. Openness to remote, I think, really does help. But you know, to some extent, people with the right skill set are sort of in the driver's seat still. You know, there's a lot of demand out there. I think LinkedIn is actually a really good channel. Like, I'll accept connections from folks who are just interested in learning about the industry. I think I would say kind of to Jeremy's point, don't be shy about reaching out to people that you think might be interesting to talk to or learn from. I think people are very willing to help, particularly now that, you know, we are sort of at home, have maybe a little bit of different schedule flexibility than we usually do. But yeah, I mean, I don't see that it's gotten exceedingly more difficult than it was before, except other than that, you know, a lot of businesses are still facing kind of headwinds. There's still a lot of demand out there, and the remote aspect of it really opens up the degree of opportunity that's available.
I have friends who have said that the most interesting thing for them is that they've noticed they can do business internationally all of a sudden, because nobody wants Americans to come overseas anyway right at the moment, and all the rest of that. Let me toss in a couple things. One of the other hats that I wear is I'm the past president of DAMA International, which is the major professional association for the data world out there. And we do fairly regular studies on these things and find out that most people come to data after 10 years in IT. And I'm guessing the scenario of shortened tenure discussion goes something like this. Man, if somebody would do something about this data stuff, everything would be a lot easier and a lot better around here. And somebody else says to them, you said the word data, therefore you're the data person. So go learn about it and become our data person. That's a tremendously inefficient process, just for starters. And of course, we're facing a very outsized supply and demand equation right at the moment. So one of the things that the remote can allow you to do is it obviously levels the playing field, because we can do this without appearances in any way, shape, which means that your specific passion around data is an opportunity for you to connect very well with somebody on the other end of that Zoom link, and try to look for opportunities to do that, because what we're seeing in the data world is that people are attracted to it because they're jobs. That's great, but there also are some really big problems, and I find that those big problems that people are trying to do are the things that are attracting people into this industry right now.
Yeah, those are all really good points. Peter, that was cool how you mentioned about like inefficient ways of basically starting out with a data career. And that kind of, I'm going to backflip off that and segue into the next question, which is, what sort of mistakes have you guys seen people make trying to enter this field?
I think one of the mistakes I've seen is, well, first of all, to back up to a slightly different question. A lot of times people, because there's no specific way to define data engineering, right? It can range from being just an ETL person, which is what I used to think it was, to a full-blown software engineer that specializes specifically on data applications and APIs and whatnot. So for somebody who's trying to enter the field and expects to just only do ETL type tasks, and let's say they get to a company and then the position is kind of fluid, and a lot of times sometimes people get discouraged by that. I know this kind of happened to me when I accepted the position at Capital One. I imagined data engineering being like what I used to do at my smaller analytics company before, where I'm responsible for data, making it from the FTP server to the database in the pristine form, and maintaining all the software around that. So when I got to Capital One, the data engineer position that the requirements that I had to fulfill were essentially that of a software engineer. So I had to pick up a lot of the skills and frameworks and tools that I didn't even plan on doing. And I think I knew somebody in a very similar position, and they were not very thrilled about that, right? So I think it's gonna sound silly, but kind of to quote Charles Darwin, right? Adapt or die. So you have to make sure you're willing to grow with the times and, grow with the fact that your requirements are going to be changing. The job responsibilities are going to be changing. So.
And Irina, I would just like give a +1 to that answer. The couple things I've seen that really be successful out of your answer is, you know, kind of an unwillingness to accept the box that somebody might want to put you in. So you can say, you know, I'm not just doing ETL. I'm actually, you know, creating a solution around some data related problem here. And just, you know, having that, you know, willingness and desire to learn, to, you know, take on board whatever skills you need to get that done. So.
Yeah, I think kind of a corollary to that is, and the thing that I've seen sometimes is, you know, if you're going to engage in data engineering and kind of go after that data engineering position, I think people sometimes treat it as, you know, data engineering is a stepping stone to some other thing that I later want to do. I think you see a little bit of that with data science, which can come across as more glamorous. I think the big thing there is, I think it's okay for people to make kind of like mercenary decisions about their career progression. Like I'm not saying like, hey, you have to be deeply impassioned about it. I am, but that's, you know, maybe a weird thing. But you do have to kind of want to do that job, and you do have to care about the things that data engineers need to care about. Because otherwise it's tedious. This is, you know, it's hard work. It's not always fun. And you kind of have to really want to engage on it if you're going to progress and be successful in it. You know, it's as a hiring manager, it's tough to talk to someone who kind of already has their eye on the door when they're talking to you about a position. So that's a mistake that I've seen people make.
I think one of the things I've observed, and it's quite frankly been a personal challenge, is how to teach collaboration. I see data very much as a team sport, and I'll ask my panelists to actually reflect on this as well. But you know, how can we keep and increase the amount of collaboration we have when we've actually reduced the amount of communication and connections that we have?
Cool. Well, I'll go ahead and head to the next question. So this one's kind of interesting, and it's like totally just freestyle. You know, just say whatever's on your mind. But have you guys seen any trends or sort of tools that have emerged due to the pandemic? Whether it's using LinkedIn more often or using meetups, online stuff, and basically this is stuff that you guys would, in theory, you know, recommend to any data professionals to kind of keep their eye on, or you know, start to pay attention to. I'm also posting this in the chat, by the way, so everyone can see it.
Yeah, I mean, I can start that. One trend that I've seen in my daily work, but not strictly related just to Elastic, is adoption of software as a service. I've run into a whole lot of people who are, you know, realizing that their systems in their on-prem data center or maybe self-managed in a cloud provider were kind of being kept up by the diligent CPR of their staff every single day. And they're, you know, starting to value, you know, what it means to have another company that specializes in some specific thing really take care of a problem for you. So yeah, I would say pre-COVID, I saw a lot of, especially like software engineers, DevOps engineers who would say, no, we really want to do everything ourselves and have control over everything. COVID hits and all of a sudden everyone's like, we need a specialist to deal with this particular part of our architecture and, you know, make some problems go away so we can focus on our core business.
Yeah, I think I can second that answer because, and I mean, I don't think this was the case at Capital One just after COVID. I think from my anecdotal evidence and from my anecdotal experience, we've had a lot of those tools, you know, that focus on one specific thing. For example, you know, for monitoring the APIs, we use, let's say we use Elk, right? And then, you know, if we find out that this is not necessarily fitting our needs, we switch to another tool. So, you know, the downside there being that, you know, there's a lot of turnover and, you know, what technologies you need to learn. But yeah, I think when the switch to working from home has happened for us in March, I think we were in a pretty decent position to do so, given that we've, you know, the company has invested so much in the cloud. So yeah, I guess for a lot of other companies that might not necessarily have done so already, then you have, you know, what Jeremy said is probably true.
Yeah, I would kind of third that. I think it's, it's what everyone's seeing, which is like, kind of natural trends are accelerating. For us as kind of a vendor of technology, we're seeing a little bit more pull for the fact that we have, sort of a pretty lightweight web interface. There's not a lot of administration that needs to happen on end user machines, and it provides them with that kind of window into the data. It's not a drastic change, but you can tell that people are more oriented around things that don't involve its installation, don't involve an on-prem aspect, things where, we do take on some of that management burden. Because as companies are pressed from a cost perspective, it really does seem like they're, part of it is, okay, let's focus on our core and let's get other people to do these things who can perhaps do them more cheaply.
And I'll add on to that. Again, I agree with everything the others have said so far. The opportunity that is being described, however, is an opportunity to provide a value proposition around that. And so you would go to a specialist that can do this because in theory, they're going to be faster, better, and cheaper and more accurate than what you're doing internally. And we're going to see more and more of those skill sets develop. That trend towards specialization is going to keep going. In the old days, if you knew data, that was good enough, and that was about anybody could think of. Now we can talk about, and I think we've probably benefited from all the things that have happened in data science, but there's been an awful lot of articles that say data science alone is not going to solve all these problems. And I think that's what we're seeing now is the rise of the rest of the supporting architecture to create all the rest of this.
And real quick, I would tie that back to the previous question about, people kind of entering the job market or in a transition period, because I firmly believe that everybody has a superpower. You might not know what it is, but if you think hard enough, you can find something or you can develop something. Make that your superpower. Somebody needs it. People are hiring remote now. And as Peter was mentioning, that specialization is a personal value proposition for a job seeker.
This is all great advice. Yeah, thank you all for chiming in. And now this last question will basically round out the general advice. So it's meant to be sort of a quick rapid fire 30-second, I guess, like top of your head advice on pretty much, out of all your experiences, what's probably the most important takeaway or lesson you guys would tell people sort of entering this field?
I could start. Don't be afraid to tell somebody you don't know the answer to a question. That has served me very well over the years, and I'm definitely not the smartest egg in the basket.
Piggybacking off of that, I'd say, if you're dealing with, the imposter syndrome, which probably most of us know what this is when you think you don't belong or you're not good enough to do this. Make sure to understand that a lot of us are dealing with it, and a lot of times people, may appear that they know all the questions or answers to all the questions, but in fact that is not the case.
Yeah, I would say, given multiple options, whether it's an assignment at work or new positions, whatever it is, always take the hardest one, the one people say can't be done. You'll learn the most and have the best experience.
Yeah, just as a bit of kind of tactical advice, the thing that I found worked really well in terms of, kind of succeeding over the long run in any given project or any given sort of environment is, take the time to understand the data, understand the semantics around it, get a feel for it, develop intuition. That investment upfront during whatever it is, the first N number of days during a project, I think yields a huge amount of benefit downstream in kind of any data engineering environment. So just, semantics, understanding the, getting to meaning, I think is really important.
This is all great. Yeah, I really like what Jeremy said. Taking the hardest choice is, that'll, you'll basically be the star of the project as long as you sort of deliver okay, but you'll also learn a lot, and you might fail a lot, but you'll probably never forget it for the rest of your career, which I think is great. So now we'll kind of start the hot take questions, which, I made all these. If you guys, want to correct me on some of them, go for it. But basically we'll start it off with so data engineering isn't really formally institutionalized. You don't see 4-year degrees in data engineering. There's a lot of things that you can define a data engineer with, a lot of skill sets that define a data engineer. So do you guys think that most employers know what they want from a data engineer if, say, they're putting a job posting out there, looking to get into data engineering or building a data warehouse or whatever those things are called? Who knows? From a hiring manager perspective, that's not technical. What do you guys think? Should applicants keep this stuff in mind?
I think it really depends on the company that's posting that, the job description. If the company is hiring their first or second or third data engineer, they might not even have an idea of what it is. I mean, it's probably somebody in the company put together, a list of qualifications and required skills. Somebody who may not even know what they actually need. And the only reason I'm saying this is because I've been on the other side of that, where my company would, would say, oh, we need to hire a new data analyst. We need them to know, let's say VBA. I'm thinking VBA is outdated. We want somebody who knows like Python, for example, right? So same thing here. If a company is brand new to the data engineering journey, they may have no idea what they want, and you're kind of just coming in, and you're probably going to be a jack of all trades for them, especially if it's a smaller one. And by jack of all trades, I mean, you're going to have to know networking concepts, you're going to have to know cloud concepts, you're going to have to know cybersecurity. I remember I had an interesting time explaining to a manager of mine that there's a difference between somebody who writes software and somebody who's doing IT work. But I'm guessing for companies that are a little slightly more ahead on their, data engineering, data transformation journey, I think they have better defined expectations of, around what they want the new hire to do. So.
Yeah, I don't think it's a problem if someone does or does not have a clear idea of what they need out of a data engineer. If someone doesn't know, I think it's really just an opportunity for you as the applicant for a position to sell your value by asking them some pointed questions about what they need. It demonstrates your domain expertise, the fact that you're focused on addressing their concerns, and can only lead to good things, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think there's kind of the different but related problem, which is, even when organizations do know what data engineer, what they mean by data engineer, it's going to mean different things in different organizations. So I think as an applicant, one of the things to be on the lookout for is, okay, well, how closely does this match with the things I actually want to do? How closely does it match with the skills I actually have? Because even if they have a very concrete definition of data engineer in their world, it may leave out some big chunks of the things that you really kind of care about and want to do. But I think, kind of Jeremy's point is, if there is that ambiguity, then, particularly if you're a little bit more senior in your career, you can help define the role, and that can be really rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I think I mentioned this, but that's kind of what happened to me when I came into Capital One, because I had a year of experience as a data engineer, but again, it was an ATL data engineer. So when I was coming in, I was like, oh yeah, I'm just going to continue doing what I was doing earlier. And I think a part of me is actually glad that I didn't know how tough it's going to be up front, because I probably would have never signed up for it in the first place. So.
I think one of the other things that everybody has pointed out too is that this entire field is going to continue to evolve at a very fast rate. And remember, our definition of technology is something that appears magical. So something that's magical today would not have been magical a couple of years ago, would have been even more magical a couple of years ago. And yet, a couple of years out from this, we'll be looking back on some of the things that we've been doing in ML and saying, why weren't we doing this 20 years ago, and things like that. By the way, the reason was we didn't have the data to train the algorithms, but that's a different story entirely.
And now we don't have the infrastructure.
Yep.
Guys, I think those were terrific answers. I mean, personally, I came from a sort of data science consulting firm, and so I was very much in the position where there wasn't much established, and I had to learn a lot of data engineering skills pretty much all at once, and it was challenging but incredibly rewarding. I mean, that experience made me, in my opinion, a pretty decent data engineer. And so, yeah, that's a really positive way to look at it, and I think that's good. I think that is good. So next question will basically be, I personally think that, a sort of unspoken skill, because if you look up skills for data engineering, I think that you'll find things like Hadoop, Spark, 10 years of Python, whatever you want to call it. But I think an underrated skill is kind of like being able to push through hours of debugging without losing motivation. Do you guys think that there's any sort of underrated skills that data engineers or beginners should focus on?
Communicating with humans.
Yes. Sorry.
Don't mean to be flip, but it's certainly something. You know, we've had lots of miscommunication that goes on. So the more we can ground ourselves and formally define metadata and make sure that everybody really does agree on the same things, and that up is up and down is down and all the rest, that's got to be an incredibly underrated skill.
Yeah, I think the collaborative aspects of it are incredibly important. Fundamentally, it's kind of a team sport, right? As a data engineer, you're almost always creating something that someone else needs to consume. And then the other part of it, I think Peter, that you touched on, which is great, is there are technical aspects to that, right? There are things like metadata management and catalog and having the ability to sort of formally define the structures. And there are the soft elements of it, which are around how do you work effectively with people? How do you understand what their needs are? How do you make sure that you're being sort of a positive contributor in that team environment?
I'd say from personal experience, I had two things that I had to learn, or two or three things I had to learn when I transitioned into a data engineering role. One is reading documentation and choosing documentation over Stack Overflow, right? So like digging into lines and lines of very fun to read Hadoop documentation, for example. Another one is, and again, coming from a DA background, I've realized that the way a lot of languages are used by data engineers is entirely different. So the Python you're going to learn as a data scientist is entirely different than the Python you're going to use as a data engineer to like build pipelines and whatnot. And I think thirdly, and then I think the biggest thing that I had to pick up as a data engineer in the last year was various types of testing and testing frameworks. So, because, as a DA, we do test our data, but we do test our methods, but it's not nearly as ingrained in us as it is for people who come from a computer science background, who end up a lot of times in data engineering roles. So I know as part of our deployment, we definitely do integration tests, unit tests, acceptance tests, performance tests. I mean, the amount of tests that you have to perform, it just makes your head spin. So just, I think I spend half of my time writing tests and I spend the other half of the time actually writing, software. So those, I guess, some of the and again, this is targeted towards people who come more from a DA background and trying to move into a data engineering role.
Yeah, I would tie together Irina and Peter's comments because a lot of that testing and verification that needs to be done is really making sure that you're delivering on what people actually needed and understanding requirements and implementing them as needed efficiently, reliably. And all those people that you need to communicate with, that's your kind of de facto team for that project, and you'll be successful or not together. So I think, viewing it through that lens, the testing becomes a lot more meaningful. Version control and change control, become really important to everybody, including the people who don't normally worry about that kind of thing.
Sorry, I was talking to myself, but all right, I'm back. Okay, so another one. Basically, are there any gaps that should be considered in the data engineering hiring process? So for example, you're a nursing student, you go to college for 4 years, you do some rotations, and you're pretty much lined up with a job a few months afterwards. Or it's kind of open-ended because like you might have data engineering skills, but the job you want or a job you're thinking about applying for is asking for a whole different set of skills that you might not be familiar with, but still under the whole data engineering umbrella.
I think it's interesting because there's sort of a well-established career path for software engineers that are entering the professional world, and you kind of can hire a software engineer kind of directly from undergrad. They might have a computer science degree, they might have some other engineering degree, and there's sort of an assumption that these are people that are going to have to learn things on the job. They're not going to kind of emerge from college sort of fully formed and ready to contribute to a team. I think the gap isn't so much, maybe not in the pre-hiring process, but perhaps in the post-hiring process. I think there needs to, be a more developed sense of a career trajectory for data engineers and the notion of an entry-level position for data engineers. There is this kind of expectation that somehow data engineers are going to already have, be able to tick off these 7 or 8 skills before they're ever going to be able to get a job. And honestly, it's like, I'd rather, as we grow, I'd rather, hire for talent and hire for, sort of motivation and engagement and then get those people the skills that they need. So to me, that feels like a gap.
It's very encouraging to hear for, I'm sure, any beginners out there, you know, looking to get into the field. You know, you'll want a hiring manager like Demetri.
Yeah, I mean, I would hire somebody who taught themselves one skill before someone who mysteriously and somehow checks a whole lot of arcane boxes. I wonder a lot more about the person who can do absolutely everything, but I have a lot of respect for somebody who has taught themselves from scratch even one skill, because it shows a propensity to learn and grow.
I think the way I've bridged my gap, I mean, I come from a STEM background, but a non-programming background. So I did mathematical economics at U of R. So I think I only had like one CS class that I hated with passion just because it wasn't my thing. And here I am, you know, 5 years later or 6 years later doing exactly that. But what I did is I literally went and looked at the different curricula for a CS minor for schools nearby. So I looked at University of Richmond, I looked at UVA, I looked at VCU, and I figured, okay, out of these maybe 5 or 6 classes, what am I missing? What do I need to know if I want to be a programmer or a data engineer, right? And you know, the things that I've identified, okay, maybe discrete math would be an important one. Actually, I would argue that discrete math is probably one of the most important, you know, classes that you need, they need for you know, to have in your background, whether it's a formal class or just you pick up a textbook and, you know, pick up the concepts from there. And I guess a class on data structures was very useful because a lot of times, I know, even though those of us who come from a STEM background, that doesn't necessarily mean you have those particular skills. I mean, yeah, you have the analytical skills, like, you know, like Demetri said, you know, maybe you have the talent for teaching yourself, but it would be good if you had some of the foundations taken care of before you jump into harder things. So I know, like, on next on my list is, besides my graduate classes that I can't wait to be done with at some point, would be, taking a class that focuses on OSs, so that I know how exactly things are interacting on an OS. Right now, I'm kind of just poking in the dark and hoping that, you know, I'm not going to run into any issues anytime soon, but it's definitely looming over my head. So
Interesting. I would say that the gap that I see the most is a lack of understanding of the concept of systems thinking. We don't tend to teach that anywhere in our curriculum. In fact, my wife, who is a comptroller, came to me a couple of years ago and said, "Give me the best book on systems thinking. I'm tired of people talking about it." Now, let's think about what we're doing. As engineers, we're working in coordination to implement a plan that was too complex for any one engineer to actually solve. So that goes back to the theme that you've heard several times already of the absolute need for group collaboration and the fact that other people will have great ideas. But if you don't understand systems thinking in general, it's going to be very, very hard for you to understand how your role fits in. Again, go back to Jeremy's comment where he said, look, the real problem is, have you solved what the user has asked for? And if you don't understand what the user said, you can't possibly. You might get lucky, but that's not a good way to plan your career.
Peter, do you have a good recommendation on a systems thinking book by any chance?
Believe it or not, the one that I've seen that I've referred more people to is out on the web. I think if you Google systems thinking, it's one that pops right up. But no, I do not have a systems thinking book that I've been looking for too. Maybe somebody in the audience knows one.
Well, you guys can feel free to post it in the chat. I'd love to share it with the rest of the group.
I really like The Fifth Discipline. It's Peter Senge. Good book.
Certainly. Yes, a good one.
Okay, nice. Well, there's one suggestion right there. There we go. So this will be the last question that kind of wraps up the hot take, and then we'll open it up to audience questions, which I'm really looking forward to. And this actually kind of somersaults off of what Peter said earlier about, like, you know, tech moving really fast and then, you know, trends dying quickly and data engineering changing. So, you know, what's one prediction, quick prediction, like 5-10 seconds you'd make about data engineering in 2021?
I can go first. I'm finishing up a book on data literacy right now, and I predict that within a couple of years, everybody in the organization will go through annual data training the same way we go through annual security training at this point.
I'd say from my experience, I think we'll see more demand in data streaming with the rising need of, like, real-time analytics.
You know, maybe two things: democratization of data, people using data systems more commonly without, formal training. And yeah, I think that's the big one.
Yeah, I would kind of echo Jeremy's point. What I'm seeing is a lowering of the hurdle for folks to do data engineering. To some extent, people are going to pick data engineering as a major, but almost everyone kind of has data engineering as a minor. So tools that allow more people to participate and more people to be productive with data, I think, are going to be important.
Yeah, I think those are all pretty good predictions. I'm personally aligned with pretty much all of them, which is good. Peter, I guess you guys should start brushing up on some Python classes, maybe. If you guys forget those, because those skills diminish pretty quick if you don't use them. So we'll go ahead and move into the audience questions now. And the first one is a good one, and I think we touched on it earlier. So for those of us who've recently broken into the field, I'm reading this verbatim, by the way. This is from Anonymous. So for those of us who have recently broken into the field and have a healthy dose of imposter syndrome, how do we stay in the field? I guess, kind of open to interpretation for whoever wants to answer.
I can take that one because I know I've talked about the imposter syndrome. I personally find CBT helpful. For those who don't know, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's literally, the idea is that, your thoughts affect your brain chemistry and affect your actions. So, if you are literally training your mind to not think negatively about yourself, and, this takes practice. Basically, that's what helps me stay in the field. Like literally today, dealing with like a dozen merge conflicts and things are not working as expecting, and Jira stories piling up on my board, and thinking, why am I doing all this? And and this is the perfect time to say no, it's just this is just how it is. This is just the nature of things. Everybody's struggling with that. It's not just me. So literally as simple as that.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Sorry, were you about to say something, Jeremy?
Oh yeah, I was just, there was a book that sort of made the rounds. I enjoyed it, called Radical Candor, which is maybe more focused on, giving people feedback and things like that. But I think it works in a lot of scenarios, just, being really candid with somebody and saying, I am feeling some imposter syndrome. I would like help. I don't know how to do this. I respect you, whoever you're talking to, because of, your skills in this area. And most people are, far more than glad to help out and mentor you on that topic.
Yeah, as a junior dev, I find it extremely helpful to just, admit, be like, hey, I'm not familiar with that term, or could you explain that? And especially with things being online, I don't have to do it in front of a big stand-up, even though it's totally fine to do it in front of a stand-up, but it's never going to hurt you by learning something new.
Yeah, I love this idea of sort of honesty around lack of knowledge in a particular area or ability in a particular area, and having the ability to be open with your peers about like, hey, this is somewhere where I need help. This is somewhere where I don't feel confident. The other thing that I would add in is like just kind of look for those small wins. When I'm kind of deep in it, for me, it's just like, what is the small question that I can answer right now, that I can kind of chalk up as a point and kind of move on to the next thing. So it's, again, just, accumulate the small victories, take a minute to sort of feel good about that, and then move on to the next thing, rather than trying to push everything along incrementally at once. It's always good to get that small win, I think.
I think that's great advice. So we'll go ahead and move to the next question, because we have a few left and we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to try to crank through the rest of them. So the next one is basically, when you're at a company whose data engineering team is small or non-existent, how do you decide what to focus on and basically not go down rabbit holes or waste too much time? And when pretty much everything seems important at the same time: pipelining, APIs, storage infrastructure, scalability, etc.
The smaller you are, the more you're going to have to rely on capabilities versus technologies. So if you're in a small organization, you're going to be doing most of the problem identification and problem solution yourself. Again, as much as you can communicate with everybody else, obviously, is going to be helpful there. But again, larger companies are going to be able to access larger amounts of technologies, different industrial strength solutions and things, and that's simply not going to be available with the smaller organizations.
Another way to approach it would be, again, this may not work for some companies, but what I've seen from my professional experience, sometimes when you allow your analysts from other fields like data analysts, business analysts, to allow them and give them more, give them the freedom to learn some things that to maybe help out the data engineers. Like, for example, at the company that I was working previously, where we only had one data engineer for the entire, team of 10 or 15 people. He just ended up training us on the basics of data engineering. Like, here are the basic troubleshooting things you can go through before you come to ask, come out and ask me for help. That way, that took a lot of things off his plate, so we could, so he could actually focus on those things. And again, I understand that not every company will have business analysts eager to learn data engineering concepts, but that's one way of addressing it.
Yeah, I would seek out a business partner in that scenario. If the company's that small, maybe it's the CEO or a manager or a sales rep, something like that. Because ultimately, if you're one person and 50 things need done, something has to be the most valuable to the company. And someone, again, maybe it's the CEO, probably needs to make that call.
Yeah, just a really tactical piece of advice. Don't get bogged down in tools and frameworks. I think particularly starting out, it's very easy to try to kind of pull in a lot of technology. Keep your stack as simple as possible and try to solve, try to solve the small problems first. I think the thing that I've seen most that has slowed down small teams in particular is just getting bogged down in tools and frameworks that are for requirements they don't have.
I think at my old job, I think we had a team in the UK, we had a team in New Zealand and a team in Richmond. And I think there was a decision that the management has reached that we are only going to use these particular tools for development, even though some other tool may be better for a particular client. But then we wouldn't have to worry about cross trainability. So a team from UK can help in the middle of the night when the US team is sleeping, for example. So I think I definitely agree with that comment. Try to keep it simple, so everybody who's coming on the team can be onboarded fairly quickly.
Okay, nice. So I'm gonna move on to the next question. And then there's a few questions left. I'm gonna merge a couple of them into the same one, but we'll answer this one first. So basically, other than job experience, how much you demonstrate skill? What kind of data engineering effort could you demonstrate in, say, GitHub or Portfolio?
There's so much going on with open data, and we're, I think, isn't Carlos running his datathon this week? Or
Yeah, that's
last week? Next week, okay, good.
A hackathon for data going on.
Exactly. There's so many of those types of opportunities. That is where you need to jump in. By the way, there are also great collaboration and great places to learn from as well. So, look for those opportunities. And if one doesn't exist, make one. It's not hard.
Yeah, I would kind of in the spirit of previous comments about keeping things simple, I would have, one project on GitHub that does, some really cool things, but not only that, represents a complete solution to a problem that a prospective employer might actually have. I would take that any day over someone with a huge portfolio of small pieces and examples.
I think in my case, I kind of got saved by the bell because I had a lot of these projects that I had to implement through school, through my master's classes. So even though, when I got to any potential interview, even though I didn't necessarily have any GitHub projects open to the rest of the world, I could talk about things I've done in the classroom, developing models, building pipelines, et cetera, et cetera. So it kind of like a virtual portfolio, if you will.
Yeah, I would say, this is maybe more kind of reflecting on how far we've come. Like the amount of data that's out there and the amount of open source tooling that's out there and the things that you can kind of just grab and pull together feels almost magical compared to, 25 years ago when you had to get an Oracle license and install it on a server. Point being, there are things that you can do out there if there's something that kind of grabs your attention in terms of data. A really simple bit of analysis on some piece of open data could really be just a great demonstration project. And at the entry level, demonstrating solid SQL skills, the ability to understand and manipulate data and kind of get to an answer is pretty compelling.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Demetri. So let's see. Looks like a question got deleted. All right. So
That was me making a silly answer. We had tab spaces, and I said I'm a tabs guy.
okay. Yeah. It like broke my train of thought because I'm like reading off this Q&A and I just see some stuff get moved around.
I feel like now we have to have a whole other meetup about tabs versus spaces. By the way, the answer is spaces.
The answer is spaces. Interesting. All right. So last question, I guess. And it's kind of going to wrap up a couple questions at the same time. And that's basically like, it's kind of a general one. I didn't really ask anything like this in the general advice section because I think you can Google it mostly, no offense. And if you have a hard time, message me or someone else on the panel. I'm sure they'd be happy to answer. But how do you basically break into data engineering and what to learn first? Like I said, if you guys, Googling is always a good option and messaging me is a second good option. Yeah, so I'm gonna leave Professor Google up to that one. But
yeah, I heard message Sam Portillo.
Yeah,
I could give a brief, like, if you're already in and I can only speak to those people who are already in data roles because I guess it's easier to answer that. But for those who are already in data roles, find out where your data is coming from. Find out the team who's responsible for processing your data, and see, maybe get some informational interviews with them. That's kind of how I got started. I said I wanted to be a better data analyst, so like, let me see what my data is coming from, and I just kept going down the rabbit hole.
yeah, and actually, I remember what I was going to mention about Demetri's point earlier before the messages all messed me up. But I mean, I host some personal projects on Azure for free, basically. I mean, it's basically free. I pay like 3 cents in storage a week because if you're smart about how you do it, I mean, you can do some great things and have some always on apps, basically just by being smart and going about that. But, that's a lot more, like having some personal projects up there is a really good way to like show off your skills or, just have some fun functional things run on the cheap, So I think that pretty much does it for questions. Again, feel free to ping me or anyone else if you guys have any other questions. I do kind of want to take a minute and thank everyone for coming. You guys have been great. I loved the chemistry and the chatter you guys had. This has been terrific. This is recorded as well, so if you guys want to like review some of these questions later on, this is DC Data Engineering is going to post it somewhere. Rashawn, I don't know if you guys have any upcoming events soon posted that you guys want to kind of advertise right now, but I think RVA Data Engineering has a couple, but we're on Meetup, we're on Slack, ping me if you guys want details and stuff like that. But yeah, if anyone has any like sort of closing remarks they want to throw in, go for it. The room's open.
I'll give you a quote that's coming out of the data literacy book. The federal government actually measures data literacy, which is kind of interesting. And while it's nice that they do it, the last couple of measurements have showed us be absolutely stagnant. When you compare that to the amount of data that is occurring, that is not a winning proposition. So it's maybe a doom and gloom type of thing or a call for urgency.
Well, I think that's a really good way to end the night. So again, thank you all for coming. I'm Sam. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Slack me, whatever. I'm pretty available. So you guys
Thanks,
so much.
Nice speaking with you all.
Nice meeting you. Feel free to add us on LinkedIn. I'm sure you have the links.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Good luck.
All right, bye-bye.